Welcome back to Victoria 3. Last time we went over the resources you have access to in-game and the user interface. Today we're going to cover how to run a successful economy that not only brings you in a ton of money, but also raises your country's GDP to rise your country through the ranks of prestige. So as we briefly touched on in the previous part, there are really two economies in the game that you need to be worried about. Your internal economy is basically whichever market you're a part of, whether you're the capital of it or not. This market is mostly summarized in the details page of the market tab, where you can see what goods are plentiful and which are in high demand. Your main goal with this market should be for all goods to be plentiful, since that will reduce the price of these goods within your internal market. This might seem a little confusing, since the market price for everything being low makes it seem like you'll be earning less money, since all of your businesses will be earning less money, but in reality all your market price tells you is what your population is paying for these goods, and by reducing all the prices, they will have money to spare, raising their standard of living and GDP per capita. Plus, production chains also have to pay for these goods, so having a nice supply of less complex goods to make more complex goods will mean big bucks for you. Now, oversupplying to the point of plummeting the market price well below the norm will cause problems, as the buildings producing the goods will not be able to pay all their wages with the reduced income, and have to rely on government subsidization to keep them producing at full capacity. The trick to keeping things balanced is to, well, keep them balanced. You want to aim to hit the middle of the market price scale or slightly to the left as much as possible to keep your people wealthy and happy, whilst also keeping businesses afloat to keep paying those people, and around the circle goes. It's the circle of economics. It's also important that all states in your internal market have full access to that market so they can access goods at the standard price. This is measured on a state level, with each state having a percentage access to your country's market. This percentage is worked out by how much infrastructure supply has versus the demand. Infrastructure is consumed by all buildings in the state and is produced by railways and ports if the state is local. Basically, always make sure your states have 100% market access, otherwise they will have reduced production for all buildings and have a high price of goods than they should, leading to a low standard of living. So, to summarize internal markets, keep the price in the middle by making more of the stuff with a very inflated price, but should you also be making less of the stuff with a very low price? Well, no, and that's where the external economy comes in. Now, technically the external market is actually every single other market you can interact with, but in the interest of simplicity, let's pretend it's one market with different shops. Of course, to interact with external markets, you have to use trade routes, and these can be used to increase the supply or consumption of pretty much any good. If you're making too much of something and it's negatively impacting the price, make some export routes to bring the price closer to the middle. And if you're not making enough of something and can't increase the supply internally or very quickly, make an import route to again bring the price close to the middle. When doing either of these, you also need to take into account the external market price of each good, which will vary depending on which market you interact with and change when a new deal is made. For example, if we wanted to increase the supply of tools in our country, we have 4 options of markets to buy from externally. Each of these will have their own effects on your market and that of the market you import from, and all of this comes together to calculate the productivity of a trade. This is just how much revenue you will make from this trade per employee involved, and the higher this is, generally, the better the trade route is for your entire country. Lucky for you, the game works all this out for you, so you can just click on productivity, click the best one, and that's it. Of course, be careful of putting all your eggs in one basket, as if you trade everything with one market and that market decides to embargo you or otherwise cut you out, you're going to be in trouble. All of this applies for exporting a good too. Just find something that you make a lot of, in this example Man O' Wars, and find the best export route you can in terms of productivity. If routes like these continue to be productive, they will automatically expand operations to move large quantities of good, requiring more convoys in the process. Because of this, it's advised you don't make, say, 4 trade routes for tools all at once when you need them. Instead, get the best trade setup that you can, wait a few months to see if it continues to be productive, and expand if you need to. This not only saves on bureaucracy, but also gives your trade deals a high chance of remaining productive, since there are less factors affecting them, like external and internal market price changes from all the different trade deals. If trade routes stop being productive, the game will prompt you to cancel them, which you probably should do, and then replace them with a better deal to keep things stable if needed. The external market is also where you can capitalize on niches. Say you're the first country in the world to be able to produce fertilizer. You can produce as much of this as possible and export it to everyone for a massive productivity. If you can position yourself as the global leader for a certain good, then you'll reap the rewards for the entire game, as long as you can keep up the production to meet the demands of your customers. Now, all of this is well and good, but you can't spend money doing these things if you have none of it to spend. As we covered in the previous part, you don't actually spend money in Victoria 3, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, everything has a weekly cost, and when you stack this against your weekly revenue, you get your balance change per week, which affects your reserves. Nearly every single building that isn't military or government makes you money, but by building to produce more of what your internal market needs, you can get the most bang for your buck. So in my market, I have a wood price that's around 25% higher than it should be. By expanding my logging camps, it's a safe bet I'll make money, since the market has a much higher demand, and wood is generally one of those goods that consumption only ever goes up for. As for where the money from these buildings actually comes from, there's really a few different answers, but it all comes down to production. First of all, you tax the wage of every employed pop. By default, this is around 15%, so if a building is paying 6,000 in wages, you're making 900 from that. That being said, to pay wages and have a full workforce, a building must have a positive weekly balance. This balance is shown in the process section. This shows the goods consumed and their price on your market, wages, as well as the goods produced and the income from selling them to the internal market, which is just the quantity made multiplied by the market price. It can be a bit confusing to get your head around since you are technically making money from the building's expenses in the form of their wages. That being said, you also benefit from the income of a building as a percentage of the weekly balance is added to your investment pool, which is then spent on construction of new buildings according to your laws. So it doesn't really make you money per se, but it does save you money. You can also make money from tariffs on any goods you're trading, so increasing your production of a good, then exporting it, can make you a tasty profit. Outside of increasing your production by building more buildings, you can change the production methods in various ways depending on your laws and technology. Base changes will often change the supply chain of the building, introducing new costs in the form of required goods in exchange for a higher output. They will also change the workforce of the building, normally upgrading to pops with higher wages and higher qualifications, which means more tax income for you if the positions can be filled. Purple production methods will normally change the priority of goods made in the building, essentially making more of one thing at the cost of less of another. This will also affect the balance of the building, since they'll be selling different amounts of goods, which will affect the market price and how much money the building can make. There are also changes you can make to special equipment, which normally add a new goods consumed whilst changing the number of required employees. This can be a bit more hit and miss with their income, as employing less people means less wage taxes. They're mainly done to work around what potential employees you have in the area without much impact on the actual production. If you have excess of coal and engines but no labourers nearby, then why not use the steam donkey to get production maxed out while population catches up. Transportation is another one that reduces the employees needed for a building by increasing the consumption of other goods, so if you're struggling to fill up a building's workforce, one of these should help. And finally, ownership decides who owns that building. Each option adds a number of employees to the building, meaning different amounts of tax depending which workers you hire and how many of them. Generally, aside from transportation and special equipment, I'd just stick to whichever production method has the best income, as that'll make the most money for your country and ensure buildings stay profitable and employing everyone they can for massive wages. Aside from buildings, your only other active way to make income, other than just having people in your country, is from consumption taxes. These are enacted from the budget menu and will artificially increase the internal market price of goods, allowing the government to collect the increased profit margins spent by pops. This is also useful for keeping the market price in the middle, so if you have a good with a price too low, putting a tax on consumption is a good way to bring it more into the middle for your internal economy. Now, having all this money is all well and good, but once your reserves are full, you're essentially burning the excess income, so ideally you want to avoid being 100% capacity at all times. Now, it doesn't technically harm you to have this money being burnt, but you may as well use some of this money to progress your country rather than just sitting on it. Of course, you can spend money on more buildings, but in theory, this is just going to make you more money, so it doesn't really solve your problem. Instead, you should look into ways that you can make less money for the government and give more of it to your population. This goes hand in hand with raising the GDP of your people, since you want them to hold the wealth to live better lives and be a better country. Some easy ways to do this are to lower the tax level in your country, meaning people take home more from their wage. You can also increase the wages of the government and military, which won't have as much effect on the GDP, but will increase the prestige of your nation, which benefits everyone. And by far the main thing you can do to keep your GDP rising and increase their standard of living is to keep your market balanced. You see how it all feeds into each other? If your market is balanced, your people will be able to afford everything they need to live happy lives. If it's balanced, your economy will benefit on the whole, and you can afford to further increase the standard of living for your population. And if all of this happens, your country will be richer, your GDP will continue to rise to the top. As long as you keep expanding for growth and keeping on top of everything being consumed, you should have a bustling economy in no time. And that concludes my economy guide for Victoria 3, but if you're looking at this and wishing you could play something similar in space, check out this video to learn all about Stellaris.